All right, so Alexandra was telling you about this organization that I belong to, and you all picked up a brochure. And I'm not going to sell you on the program right now, but she gave a very nice introduction. And we do have our website down at the bottom on top of the first page of the brochure. So if you have interest, you can go there and look at it. So what I would like to talk to you about tonight is planning for your funeral. Very often we'll get calls to our organization when people call us to find out what they can do because perhaps a loved one has just died and no plans have been made, and what am I going to do? So what our organization encourages is that you make those plans ahead of time so that when you die, your family or significant other or your power of attorney people know exactly what you had in mind. So I'm going to be speaking from this outline, and what I'm going to do is tell you when I answer those phone calls about what should I do. This is kind of the process that I go through in talking to those people. And for my own self, this is the process I have gone through in figuring out what I want and what I need to convey to my children. And indeed, I have conveyed it to my children. First of all, you should consider organ or full body donation. That's full body donation is the least expensive way to take care of your body after death. And I did give you a handout that shows the medical hospitals in the area that accept bodies for donation. I believe that their phone numbers are current, and if you're interested in body donation, you can call them and ask for paperwork or more information about how you set that up. One of the things that's very nice about that system is they will provide an ambulance to pick up the body and deliver it to the hospital. Medical students work on the body sometimes up to 2 years. At the end of their program, the body is cremated. Some of the universities return the ashes to the family. I know that Georgetown University has an area where they inter the ashes of all the bodies that they've used. And they have a ceremony about once a year to honor people who have donated their body to science. So when you're talking with a university about donating your body, they will have certain restrictions. I didn't know about weight. They prefer a body that organs have not been removed so that the medical students can see what an intact body looks like because they're practicing for surgery. The other thing that I like to recommend is to be an organ donor. Our organization had someone from the, what do they call it, the Washington Transplant Consortium come and talk to us, and we were older people, and we said, well, you don't want my body, do you, or my organs? And what we were told is, you know, if you have a person who's 60 years old and they need an organ, they're not going to put a 17-year-old's organ in that person. Maybe another 60-year organ would be perfectly fine. So, and when we're talking about organ transplant, that death has to have occurred in a hospital or maybe, you know, in an emergency room because the organs need to be maintained before they can be transplanted. But we can all donate our eyes, our corneas, and there may be other body parts that are needed for research. If you indicate on your driver's license that you want to be an organ donor and your body is delivered to the hospital after an accident or something of that sort, the emergency room looks at your driver's license, and if you are an organ donor, they will contact the right people. So if you're not going to donate your body, you have to answer some questions. First of all, do I want full body burial or do I want to be cremated? And those decisions will guide me in choosing which funeral home I want to have my body taken to. I am planning to be cremated, and when I have a funeral or memorial service, I will have a memorial service because the body will not be present. My cremains, my ashes will be present. And I plan to have that service held at my church. So I don't need a funeral home that has a large fancy chapel. I don't need a funeral home that does extensive embalming and dressing and a fancy casket. So what I'm going to be looking for is a low-cost organization that maybe even specializes in cremation, and so I will get a reasonable cost. So,
which is approximately how much?
Well, I guess we should get into that, because in your handouts you have the April 2013 survey that we do. On the odd years, we do a funeral home survey, and we survey most of the funeral homes in Northern Virginia, and we ask them to give us their price list, and they fill out a questionnaire for us also. And they give us the cost for what is called direct cremation, which is what I'm planning to do. My body will be taken to the funeral home, they will cremate it, and they will return the ashes to my children. There are other ways of being cremated. You can still have a visitation if that's your family's custom. You can hold a visitation at the funeral home. People can come and view the body, and then you can be cremated. So there are all kinds of ways, and you have to choose what's best for your family and your family's traditions. So if you look at this chart, the very first, the first column is the funeral homes that we have surveyed, and this was done in 2013, so this was 2 years ago. We are presently preparing our survey, which will come out in our newsletter in April, very soon, in a couple of weeks. So prices go up every year, but in 2013, these funeral homes charged this amount of money for direct cremation. And if you look in the second row for direct cremation, the column, you'll see that, and I'll just talk about the first page because it's here in front of me. There's a dignified funeral and cremation service in Triangle, Virginia that charges $1,655. That's, and then there's a Cremation Services of Virginia in Chantilly, which charges $1,245. The reason they can do that for a less expensive price, if you look also down this list, the most expensive one on the first page is Colonial Funeral Home of Leesburg. They charge $3,460. So if you look, they're the most expensive one on this first page.
The second one down is $3,800.
I beg your pardon. Thank you. And that one's in Herndon. So the reason that Herndon needs to charge $38.25, and the reason that Cremation Services of Virginia only charge $12.45, is because that little Cremation Services in Chantilly is in an industrial park. They have a very small office and some rooms in the back. They have their own, what they call the retort, where they cremate the body. But they don't do any embalming. They don't do any burial kinds of services at all, and so they have a very low overhead. However, the Adams Green Funeral Home in Herndon, Virginia, is a very old, well-respected funeral home. They're in a, almost historic building in Herndon. It's a beautiful Victorian-style building. It's got wood floors. I've been in there. They have a nice chapel. They do embalming, and so they have a higher overhead cost than the one in Chantilly. The next thing that you might choose if you aren't not interested in cremation is what's called immediate burial. In immediate burial, the funeral home picks up the body from the place of death, either a hospital, someone's home, a nursing home. They prepare the body for burial. They wash it, they disinfect it. They probably put the clothes on that you have brought. They will sell you a casket, and there's no embalming done. There's no cosmetology done, so that those services are not done, and that makes the price less expensive. Even though you're going to have immediate burial and you do not want embalming, you can still have a visitation. And you can have the service there at the funeral home, or you can have it at your church or wherever you would like. And the body is then taken to the cemetery that you have chosen to be buried. A standard funeral, which is the next column, is the most expensive way to go because embalming is done. Hairdressing is done. Cosmetics are done. There is a visitation at the funeral home so that, and it can actually be done in your church as well. Then you're going to have to pay for the body to be taken to the church and brought back to the funeral home for visitation. So all of those extra services are included, and that's why you will see in the next column that the prices are considerably more. The last column is the cost of containers, because when the person dies, you want a container for either the ashes or the body. And so what we list is the cost of urns. You'll see in the very first dignified funeral and cremation service in Triangle, they have urns that cost $20 and up. They have caskets that cost as low as $89 to $14,500. And as you go down the column, you'll see that the funeral homes vary in the cost of the containers that they would sell you. When my husband died, he was cremated, and we ordered an urn. We did see it in the display case, but they ordered it for us, and I'm trying to think. We did not have his service until several weeks after he died, so there was no hurry. And well, is the urn going to come in time? You know, it all went very smoothly. We can always come back and talk more about funeral homes, but I think we've covered most of the questions. Unless somebody has a specific question about funeral home, we can talk about burial now. And your other piece of paper, one of your other pieces of papers, is the 2014 cemetery survey. So this has most of the local cemeteries, and it also, on the very front page, on the bottom is this place called Echo Eternity Forest at High Road in Middleburg, Virginia. This is maybe what you're thinking of, because they sell you the rights to a tree, and they scatter or bury the ashes around the tree.
What happens if your tree dies?
Trees have a finite life too.
Like
Right, right, that's true. And also at this particular place, I don't believe there's, well, it says marker and biodegradable urn included. I thought they did not mark the graves, but they do. They have some kind of a little marker. I haven't visited there. One of the other of our board members went out and visited and was able to see the land and the markers.
What about burial at sea?
Burial at sea, we don't do that so much from Northern Virginia. So I don't know how you would arrange it. You can find a lot of information online.
Neptune Society.
Yeah, Neptune Society, I don't know if they work out of Virginia. I know they work out of California. And when one of my brothers-in-law died, my mother, who has a very weird sense of humor, said, oh yes, Mike wanted to be buried at sea, and he had made arrangements with the Neptune Society, but they only go out once a week or every 2 weeks or something. I don't remember what it was. And she says, and you know Mike, he missed the boat. So his ashes had to wait for, I don't know, a week or so before they could be buried. So that is a possibility, yes. And somebody was telling me about in California, there's a law that if you're going to scatter ashes into the ocean, you have to be a certain number of miles out from the coast. But you know, these things are not enforced very well. Nobody knows that you're not just going fishing.
Well, I think the fear is that if the person was diseased, they could contaminate the water.
Well, if the person's been cremated, they've been sterilized. Yeah. Some people scatter the ashes by an airplane. One of the board members, I guess it was his first wife, wanted her ashes scattered at the beach, and so they hired a plane to fly along the coast and scatter the ashes in the water. So, I mean, you've got a lot of choices. So the cemetery survey, the first column lists the cemeteries that are in Northern Virginia, and the second column talks about ground burial for a body. For ground burial, you have to purchase a lot. You have to purchase a grave liner. All of the cemeteries in our area require a grave liner if you're burying a whole body. And what this is usually a cement container that the coffin goes into, then a cement slab goes on top. And this prevents the ground from sinking over the grave so that the cemetery can mow the lawn. It doesn't have, ridges and valleys in the grounds of the cemetery. You also pay for opening and closing the grave. So that cost is to dig the grave and then to cover it back over. And cemeteries will list these prices separately. You're going to pay extra, you'll pay for the grave liner, and the cost of a marker is very variable. Some cemeteries only allow a flat bronze marker. Some allow a tombstone, and all of those things have variations in cost. Some cemeteries sell you the marker or the tombstone, the gravestone, and some do not. But if you are interested in a particular cemetery, you just need to ask them, well, how do you get a marker or a gravestone? And they will have, either they sell them themselves or they refer you to somebody who makes a marker. When you're buried at Arlington National Cemetery, the government provides the white stone that we see, that we're so familiar with at Arlington. And they, when you're buried in a military cemetery, there's, I think the only thing that can be put on the tombstone is your name, your birth date, death date. I think they put the branch of the service you were in, but very basic things. My father is buried in a national cemetery in California, and my mother is buried with him, and I believe they put her name on the back of the stone. Let's see, what else can I tell you about? Okay, so shall we talk about when you're burying the cremains, which is the legal term for ashes. You still have to purchase a lot. Now, you can often purchase a smaller lot. You don't have to purchase a full burial lot for the cremains. A grave liner is sometimes required and some not, depending on the cemetery. And if it's for an urn, the container is small. Also, when I've talked to cemeteries, sometimes they'll say, well, if the urn is metal, we don't require the outer container. If it's a wooden box, or maybe it's ceramic, or it's biodegradable, well, if it's biodegradable, they should just bury it. But you would have to talk with the individual cemetery about what their procedures are. And you pay for opening and closing the grave. That's always listed separately. If you're going to be in a columbarium, and the lady back there had a very good point, you have to know what size urn will fit in the niche. And some cemeteries have a columbarium and some do not. And the cost of the niche, if I look across at this, well, Chestnut Grove in Herndon is a municipal cemetery, so they're very reasonably priced. But if you look at their cost of a niche, it's more expensive than if you buried the cremains in the ground.
Could you tell me the difference between a columbarium and a mausoleum?
Yes, the last column is a mausoleum. And mausoleum is usually an above ground structure, which columbarium is also, but it's usually just for one family. And so it can be very expensive, kind of like the Addams family, a big structure with pillars on it and doors. And some of those, they can be small too. But if they're a large one, there's room inside. It's like a room, and there's room inside for several caskets. So, it's the family mausoleum.
What's the difference again between the ground burial of ashes and the columbarium?
Yes, the ground burial is you're going to buy a plot of grass, and they're going to dig it up and put the box or urn into the ground. A columbarium is a structure that sits up on top of the ground, and it has various niches in it, and so many people are placed in those niches, and they're like a community of niches. It's not just your family. And there's columbariums at Arlington National Cemetery too. I had attended a memorial service there, and the military has a lot of different regulations depending on how long you were in. Were you in for a career, or were you in for 3 years? Did you die in the war? And so if you're planning on being buried in a military cemetery, I have, I know it's on it's on here about funeral benefits, and because their regulations are so many and detailed, I don't know them, but you can go online and you can get that information. You need the deceased serial number and date of birth and lots of different information. Yes?
On the last column, mausoleum,
Yes.
it says cost of structure and on property cost. What's property cost?
Well, it's kind of like when you buy a house. You're buying the house, and you're also buying the land that it's on.
That's okay.
So probably because the property cost is $25,000 and there's a little 2 beside it, it probably goes by the square foot or something of that sort.
Okay.
Well, let's talk about prepaying. The Memorial Society of Northern Virginia belongs to a national organization called Funeral Consumers Alliance. And they and we recommend heartily against prepaying for a funeral home. I read an article this afternoon that our administrator wrote called "It's Never Entirely Covered." It's never completely paid for. People have had experiences where the father says, oh, it's all been covered, and then the father dies and they find out, well, there's a couple of $1,000s that they still have to pay because it didn't cover this or that or the other thing. So what we recommend is that if you want to put away money for your funeral, to put it in a savings account or a CD. CDs don't get much interest these days, but in a bank, or to buy a payable on death insurance policy where you name somebody who will get the money when you die, and the money is available right away. You don't have to wait for the estate to be settled, so that your family doesn't have to pay up front and then get reimbursed by the estate later. That way, when you die, the person who is designated can get money right away and can use whatever funds are there to make arrangements for you. Now, maybe there won't be enough money, or maybe there'll be a lot of money and some left over. And if the money is left over, it doesn't go to the funeral home, it goes to the family in that kind of a scenario. The only time that we recommend that you prepay for a funeral is if you're going to apply for Medicaid. Not Medicare, but Medicaid. If you're going to apply for Medicaid, and Medicaid is going to pay for you to be in a nursing home, they will advise you to prepay your funeral so that your benefits aren't based on that amount of money. And that's really the only time that you ought to prepay. You can prearrange. You can visit a funeral home and meet with the funeral director and say, this is what I would like, and fill out some paperwork and have it on file. That would be fine, but it's best not to prepay. What if you're on a cruise and you die on the ship? Who's going to pay to get the body back, and which funeral home are you going to go to? It can be very complicated. Also, I think, I was a nurse with hospice, if the patient is in hospice, you know that person has a limited life expectancy. That would be a fine time to prepay, because that person is not going to take a cruise to the Caribbean, So I think that would be appropriate at that time. And this is kind of what I'd like to leave you with, is to write it down and talk with your family. I don't know if you all are familiar with this type of living will. It's called the 5 Wishes. It's on your resource list. Let's see if we have a heading for 5. Yeah, it's about a third of the way down the thing. 5 Wishes, you can get a copy of this for free. You can download it from the web. Actually, I guess if you get a hard copy, you have to pay for them. But I really like this form, and I used it for myself. Inside of it, it has everything that you could think of what you want to happen when you are dying and after you have died. What I did, just as an antidote, I like the form that Virginia has, and Virginia accepts this form. But I like the form that Virginia has for a living will and advance directive to select the person that's going to speak for me, my agent, and it's very simple, and the one I used is 4 pages. I like that because it's very simple. So what I told my daughters, and I gave them each a copy, I gave them copies of that Virginia State form, and then I wrote in here what I wanted done for myself. I wrote that, and I wrote on the state form, this is my document. I wrote on this form, this is a supplement for my family, so it doesn't negate what I wrote on the legal form. And I didn't have this notarized. But I told them that I want hospice care. I told them that when I'm dying, I want them to play Arlo Guthrie and Jimmy Buffett. I told them that if they had any doubt about what the physician was recommending for my care, they should ask for a palliative care consult. Palliative care is kind of a new thing, maybe new 20 years, but there's a palliative care team at most hospitals. There's one at Fairfax, one at Fair Oaks Hospital. It's a team of physicians, social workers, and nurses who review your case and make recommendations about what would be appropriate in this situation. They talk to the family. They say, what do you want the outcome to be? Well, maybe your outcome you would like to have, I don't want mom to die. And the doctor will say, well, I can understand that, but that's not very realistic. You know, your mother's heart is failing, her kidneys are failing, her liver is failing. But what kind of outcome would you like? Well, maybe they would like me to be free of pain, be able to interact with my children. Maybe they would like me to stay alive another month so I could go to Robin's wedding. And so those people can sort through the things that are going on and advise you about whether or not that's realistic. Often what's happening, and you'll see it in the news, is that Medicare and insurance companies pay most for you in your last three weeks of life when people are trying to keep you alive. And sometimes it's futile. Sometimes you're in the ICU and you're on a respirator and you're getting IV fluids and blood transfusions, and you're going to die. We're all going to die eventually. So I want my children to get a consultation. If a doctor's advising a surgery and I'm comatose, ask for a consultation. See if this makes sense. The plan of care ought to be, in my mind, for me, that I can interact with my family, that when they come in and squeeze my hand, I'm going to squeeze back. You know, that's a very simple thing. And I want to be pain-free. I'm very afraid of pain. So I like this because it asks those kind of questions. What do you want done? And then if there's going to be a memorial service for me, I would like the following music. I would like these readings, any kind of specific requests that you would have. And there's other things that you can cross out if you don't want that. I didn't cross out much. What I crossed out was quite personal to me. So some people like to prepare an obituary. They might know that, well, I'd like them to say I graduated from UVA and blah, 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 blah. I haven't done that yet. So they'll just, you know, if I get hit by a truck tomorrow, they'll just have to figure it out. The other thing that I like to recommend, and it's on your agenda here, is the last bullet says, have the conversation. There's an organization online called theconversationproject.org, and it has a little kit that you can download to help you talk to your family about death and dying. I know I've looked at it. I talked to my girls before that came up. I ought to look at it again and make sure that I covered all the issues that they recommend. When I gave my daughters the copy of this and the copy of my Virginia Advanced Directive, I did it at one of their cousins' wedding. It was in California, and so we were, all four of us, flying out for this wedding. And so I flew with Terry and Becky, and so I had this conversation with them first. I said, okay, the wedding is Saturday afternoon. I want to have a family meeting on Saturday morning. And your significant other and your spouse are invited to this meeting. And I want to talk to you about my living will and my advanced directive. So the girl says, okay. And when we got to California, my third daughter met us there. And I said, Robin, Saturday morning, we're having a family meeting. And she says, oh, this sounds bad. And Becky said, oh, she just wants to talk to us about her living will. She filled it out on the airplane. And actually on the plane I was filling this out. So the gentleman in the family decided that this should be just between me and my daughters. They were chicken and they stayed away because, and I felt that it would have been good if they had been there because they're going to support my daughters when I die. But they chose not to come. So I had a discussion with the girls. I told them about Arlo Guthrie and Jimmy Buffett and everything that I had in mind, and it went very well. I think that myself being a hospice nurse in my past, I find it easier to talk about these issues. And when I was working for hospice, when they were growing up and they were in high school, and I'd have conversations at the dinner table. Well, I saw a patient today, and she has 5 cats in her house. Can you imagine? And I remember Robin, I think she was probably in junior high at the time, and she says, "Mom, do they all die?" And I said, "Yes, that's what hospice is about. We all die." But hospice is living up until the very last and living in a comfortable state for you and sharing that experience with your family. So any other quick questions? It's almost 8:15.
Does hospice provide care in a hospital environment?
Yes. It depends on the specific hospice. There are about 5 hospices in Northern Virginia now. I worked for what used to be Hospice of Northern Virginia, and it's called Capital Caring now. They have contracts with particular hospitals that if the patient needs to be in a safe environment, if things aren't going well at home, maybe the pain isn't under control, the family just needs some respite, they can admit a patient to a hospital, and the hospice nurse will visit you there. Now, you're going to be buried in New Jersey, but maybe this will happen here. So you can inquire about that. Capital Caring has a hospice unit in Arlington, near Arlington Hospital. It has 15 beds. Patients are admitted for very short term, till they're stabilized, and then they're sent back home again. Also, they will visit in a nursing home. Sometimes nursing homes have kind of a bad reputation that you're not getting really good care. If you engage hospice while the patient is in the nursing home, that nurse visits and kind of ensures, it's another pair of eyes. Is this patient being cleaned properly? Are they is the diaper changed every couple hours? It's nice. Would you like to bring this to a close now? I'm happy to stay for a little bit and answer more questions.
Well, thank you very much, Kathy.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.